the Worth Knowing live stream. I'm Matt Robeson, and today, as the Supreme Court lets President Trump grasp at the heart of the upcoming election, will Democrats be able to hold together and head him off? Now, as you can tell, there are two parts to that. And I was originally planning to focus on the second part about whether Democrats will come apart at the seams over the next 70 days. And then yesterday's big Supreme Court ruling happened, which explicitly allowed the Trump administration to move forward with plans to restrict mail-in voting before the midterm elections. And I started to wonder, how can I talk about both topics without giving viewers narrative whiplash? But the more I thought about it, the more I saw that they weren't two different topics. They were really part of the same topic, the larger story. The 2-year odyssey that we've been on together is about just how far Trump will push the boundaries that are supposed to contain the power of American presidents and prevent them from becoming monarchs. And the question is, how much will each of those boundaries give way? Now, one of those boundaries is supposed to be Congress, which is empowered by the Constitution to make war and determine tariffs and write the laws, which over the last 18 months has turned into a total doormat. I'll give you just one tiny example. I'm sure you can bring many more to mind. Right now, there's a bill pending in the Senate called the Clarity Act, which the cryptocurrency industry has been trying to get passed for 5 years. It deals with how we regulate crypto. And I'm not here to argue about cryptocurrency. I'm not a personal fan, but whatever. The point is, the House has already passed it. And there are enough Democrats in the Senate who want to pass it that it should have been on the way to the president's desk weeks ago, except those Democrats asked for one tiny clarification in the ethics rules. What they want is to make sure that all the members of the president's family are not allowed to own crypto businesses. That's the one tiny change. And Senate Republicans won't go along with it. Why? You know where that's going. So much for the Congress. The second major guardrail is supposed to be the supposedly co-equal branch of government, the Supreme Court. But as we saw in the ruling yesterday, they've mostly gone along with everything that Trump has wanted to do under a misbegotten, self-serving, motivated reasoning, unitary executive theory that basically becomes a blank legal check for them to do whatever the president asked them to do. Even their ruling striking down the president's unconstitutional and insane Liberation Day tariffs was a small setback. It was a tiny stone in the river that Trump would paddle around and come out the other side with a totally unhinged new set of tariffs. And the trade war that we're right now getting into with Canada is another proof point that neither Congress nor the courts is doing anything to stop what is supposed to be congressional authority. Another guardrail is supposed to be a free and independent press. Well, pour one out on the curb for them too, because the press is divided into the right-wing media, which is a full-blown propaganda arm of the president, and the supposedly mainstream media, which has now been deeply co-opted by corporate owners looking to curry favor with the administration, leaving a few remaining somewhat independent-minded outlets to do the bulk of real reporting. But it's not really working. Case in point, my old friend and multi-time former guest, the constitutional scholar Kim Whaley, wrote on Substack this week about how the Trump administration has simply erased a statutory reporting requirement for financial crime investigations. Under the Corporate Transparency Act, millions of businesses, both foreign and domestic, are supposed to disclose to the U.S. Treasury Department the identities of the people who actually own their companies. It's not public information. It's entirely intended to help law enforcement with investigations, except despite a lawful act of Congress, the Trump administration has simply ignored the law. They've even gone further and ordered that any information already collected be deleted from government databases. And if this is the first you're hearing about that, or you heard about it originally by being subscribed to Kim, you could see why I say the media is not functioning as much of a guardrail anymore. And that brings us to the final guardrail, elections. Now, to be clear, the framers of the Constitution did not call for a two-party system, but that's what evolved, and that's fundamentally what we have. That's become our best chance in the next 70 days to put in a new congressional majority of Democrats that can rein in the Mad King. But here's where that nexus between the two topics today comes in, because different factions in the Democratic Party have been going at it with rising tensions all throughout the primary season. And make no mistake, some of the divisions are very serious and very real. I talked last week on this show with Washington Monthly politics editor Bill Scheer about the radical cabal that's taken over the leadership of the Democratic Socialists of America. and just how far apart they stand from the mainstream of even the DSA membership. The biggest issue, which may cost Democrats a Senate seat and therefore a Senate majority this fall, is Abdul El Sayed's alliance with Twitch streamer Hassan Piker, who literally dresses up as Mao Zedong, a dictator responsible for tens of millions of deaths, who Piker considers, quote, one of the great leaders. Now, last week, Piker made a comment suggesting that American Jews, like me, invite violence by supporting Israel. In other words, you get what you deserve, Jews. Now, where have I heard that before? El Sayed's tepid distancing from Piker has only added fuel to the fire. So that's the big picture. Two issues that are two sides of one coin. Donald Trump represents an extinction-level event for the Republic. The last firewall is the Democratic Party's ability to win the next election. And right now, they're barely holding themselves together. So can they keep doing it? And if they pull all this off, what happens after the election? It just happens that I have the absolute perfect guest to cover all of that today, someone who's not only a progressive insider with unimpeachable credentials, but also an attorney who's done more than just about any other Democratic staffer around when it comes to protecting Americans' right to vote. My old friend and Capitol Hill colleague, former chief of staff for U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders, former legislative director for the American hero and civil rights icon John Lewis, former legislative aide for liberal lion Ted Kennedy, my sister from another mister, the pride of Lowell, Massachusetts, Michaeleen Crowell. Michaeleen,
thanks for having me on, Rat.
Well, it's absolutely my pleasure. I have so much I want to ask you about. You're a lawyer. You're a scholar. You're on the front lines of protecting Americans' right to vote. Let's talk about the Supreme Court ruling. What went down here? What did the ruling do and what did it not do from your perspective about the upcoming election and Americans' right to vote?
So to be clear, I've been a lawyer less than I've been a Capitol Hill staffer, so I will not call myself a lawyer for the purposes of this discussion. But this decision was basically the court saying, litigants, states, even though you're about to send out ballots, some of you in the next several days, you're a little too early to the process. So you're going to have to wait for a decision here. So it's a technical matter. However, it does call into question the chaos that may ensue as we try to move forward with this election cycle, where almost a third of Americans, including the president, cast their vote by mail. In some states, it's more than 50%, and it's a pretty big deal. So the Trump executive order attempted to say federal agencies create these citizenship lists, which don't exist and are bound to be rife with omissions. And U.S. Postal Service, you cannot send any ballots to people who aren't on this list. So the Postal Service just put out their rule on this. So now apparently this decision is ripe to be brought again. It restarts the clock. The states will have to refile, but this does call into question how much chaos there will be and how much confusion there will be amongst voters who do depend on mail-in voting, most of whom are elderly, a lot of folks who live in states that have no excuse voting by mail. So we have a real problem here. And it's just another example of this administration understanding that it can't win under the rules as they exist. So they want to change the rules.
Now, to be clear, and I'm not going to get into math. This is not a math show. I make a lot of jokes about every time we bring up numbers, I do all my little nerd clips. I'm not going to get into the numbers here, but to be clear, there is not an advantage that exists for one party or the other when it comes to mail-in voting. The perception that Democrats rely more on mail-in voting is a holdover from 2020, when indeed more Democrats were interested in voting by mail because Democrats were more apt to want to go ahead along with COVID restrictions. They were a little bit more conservative when it comes to social distancing and masking and wanting to preserve these kind of health moves that were meant to contain the pandemic. In that cycle, there were more Democrats who voted by mail, but study after study has basically shown that it's not like there's really an advantage for Democrats, that Democrats disproportionately vote more by mail. There are many states that conduct their elections almost entirely or thoroughly entirely by mail. And there is a mix there of Democratic leaning states Republican leaning states. And so I don't think that there's a case here that this move is really being undertaken. Trump believes all kinds of nonsense. So like maybe in his mind, he thinks that he's disadvantaging Democrats. But I think the more savvy among the president's set, if they have any strategic plan here at all, it's not about disproportionately suppressing Democratic votes. It's about disproportionately sowing chaos. It's about creating confusion among the now. And to be clear, also some demographics have swung over to supporting Democrats, including elder Americans. And so, yeah, there could be a little bit of, yeah, it probably hurts Dems more than it hurts Republicans. Maybe that might be in their thinking. But I think the bigger deal here is they want a predicate to say that the election was rigged, that there were problems with the election, that there were inconsistencies. They want to be able to sow confusion and post-election chaos because there are now two phases of American elections. There's the election and there's the post-election scramble to control the narrative and try to readjust the outcome in the courts. That's how I see it. How do you see it? You're the more experienced operative when it comes to voting rights.
Yeah, my time goes back with Congressman John Lewis when we worked to reauthorize the Voting Rights Act. And then the first piece of it was overturned by the Supreme Court in Shelby versus Holder in 2013. Democrats did nothing to turn that around, which was a real missed opportunity. And then we find ourselves with Louisiana versus Calais, which basically disenfranchises entire groups of minority voters by not being able to have districts drawn where they're able to choose the candidates of their choice. So I think what's happening here, and which is one of the major themes that has come through the administration, is that there is some massive fraud in voting, which has never been borne out, and there are no facts to support that. And so I think a lot of what we're doing here is just building that predicate, as you said, for the president to be able to say that this was a rigged election again, which is not the case. And it's just creating a lot more confusion than really needs to be right now. Honestly, the Supreme Court has been the entity that has created the most confusion in this cycle, given that the decision that happened in Calais, there were already elections underway with districts drawn in several southern states that were, one of them in particular was canceled in order to redraw the districts and start all over again. So we're seeing a lot of confusion, we're seeing a lot of anger, and we're seeing just a lot of distrust in the process, and that is by design.
It reminds me of the old legal maxim: if the facts are on your side, pound the facts. If the law is on your side, pound the law. And if neither the facts nor the law is on your side, pound the table. That's essentially what I think all of this is about. Again, I don't want to overstate. I'm being a little bit cautious here because you can dice these numbers lots of different ways. And as some people have pointed out in the chat, yeah, the thing that I brought up here, the elderly disproportionately vote by mail. Now, in some states, that means more Republicans. And there's also the fact that this is ultimately about Trump getting to decide who are eligible voters. I don't know that they're going to really be able to do that effectively and create some kind of a screen for. You could see them going about, oh, here's a Latino sounding name. Like my last name is Robeson Rodriguez. So now I'm drummed out of there, right? I don't think they can be that surgical about it. So again, I think
but there are no lists, Matt. That's the problem here. There's no list to draw from. The elections happen in the states. The elections happen in the states, but there is no list of people. And are they following court records when people get married or when they change their name? Or it creates all sorts of chaos for how do you determine who is an eligible voter, and how am I not going to be on several lists based on the fact that I was an unmarried person the month before the election and now I'm a married person with a different name. So it creates all sorts of issues that are just problematic, and it goes to things that are happening in the Congress right now with the attempts to pass the SAVE Act and to further erode the ability of people who've changed their names to vote. And again, it is a solution to something that is not a problem, and it'll only disadvantage people, and it'll only keep people out of their voting booths.
That's true. I have here your long form birth certificate. You're an Earl. I hate to tell you, and your husband's a great guy, but that doesn't confer on you the right to vote. Doesn't
Right.
match
And
up.
look,
So
I'm someone who has a passport, but there are millions and millions of people that don't have passports who
21
would then
million,
have
in
to
fact.
go back to their place of birth to get their birth certificate at a cost and potentially having to go there in person. Who has the time for that? To find their marriage certificate. Do you have any idea where your marriage certificate is, Matt Robeson? Come on now.
Okay,
This is,
listen. My wife listens to this.
but it
Don't tell
doesn't
her. Oh
impact
my gosh.
you,
Do
Matt.
you know
That's
what
the
happened to me?
point.
Do you know what happened to me this week? Oh gosh. This is so bad. So I'm coming up on my 20-year anniversary, and it's fantastic. Yeah, you've gone way past that, right? Like
26 this year.
Oh my gosh. All right. So we're coming up on it. And I don't know. I'm looking at the calendar and I've got some travel coming up. And I was talking to my wife and I was just trying to point out that I wanted to be back the day before our wedding anniversary. The point is, what came out of my lips seemed to state our wedding anniversary date. Okay. That's what happened. I'm giving myself the best possible spin on it. Don't intrubulate me any further. What the hell?
Sorry, didn't know.
Yeah, all right.
I got a call from your wife before this. I'm just putting fuel on the fire. No,
I
it's
figured
just one of those.
Yeah, I figured.
One of those issues where this is a paperwork nightmare for folks, and it has no bearing on. It'll impact Democrats and Republicans similarly, I would assume. So I'm not clear exactly what the aim is here, but it is to sow confusion. It is to they don't think they can win with the rules as they are, and so they want to change the rules.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about the Supreme Court angle of this. So this was an emergency docket, an emergency ruling, so it was unsigned. That's slightly better than rulings under the shadow docket, which have no attribution and no vote count to them, because why should the Supreme Court have to explain themselves? They're above everybody. They act with total impunity, which was the point of my article last week about the Supreme Court and the Congress. And it's titled, "Trump is Breaking the Constitution, the Supreme Court is Breaking the Republic," in which I argued that all of the virtual ink that's been spilled over the fact that President Trump is defying Supreme Court orders is merited. It's on point. It is reprehensible when the President of the United States ignores the Supreme Court. But at the same time, there's a hidden premise in it, which is this assumption that judicial supremacy is a thing, that the final word on what is constitutional and what is not comes from the Supreme Court. And I lay out the history in there of the fact that not only is judicial review the right of the court to read into laws and say this follows the Constitution and this does not only is judicial review not in the Constitution, but it's at least an accepted practice as the setup of our republic since 1803. But beyond that, the very idea that the final word, the final say, comes from the Supreme Court is a little bit of a bait and switch, and it's gotten lodged incorrectly in many of our memories. I thought that principle went back to Marbury versus Madison. It does not. It goes to a 1958 case. It's a relatively modern invention that, as I say in the article, is younger than Ellen DeGeneres. And so to me, this ruling here is a classic example of how the Supreme Court has gotten completely out of hand. It has lost the confidence of the vast majority of the American people. It's become an anti-democratic institution. It once again here, it's straining through motivated reasoning to find a ruling to allow the president to do what he wants to do, despite the very obvious common sense implication of this ruling, which is the incredible amount of confusion that it's going to sow. It runs afoul of the Purcell principle, which is you're not supposed to make these kinds of changes this close to an election because of that very reason, because it can create confusion. Lay it on me. What did you make of my article, my contention that this has to become the highest priority for Democratic voters? We can't realistically do it, even if we win majorities in both chambers, because there's still a veto power. But in 2028, this is something that I feel we have to demand of our presidential candidates, of our Senate candidates, of our House candidates, that they're going to make it job one to fix this Supreme Court situation. And I have a whole prescription for how to do it. Just give me your reaction.
And the Supreme Court has lower approval rating than the Congress does at this point, which is really hard to do. And I do think that the Congress sometimes lets the Supreme Court be the final arbiter instead of going back and passing legislation that says, no, actually, Supreme Court, this is what we intended and this is what we meant, and here's how it satisfies constitutional requirements. And so we could have done that in 2013 when Shelby versus Holder came down. We could have said, no, Supreme Court, this is the standard by which we are measuring which jurisdictions are under this pre-clearance scheme. So at any rate, I think some of your prescriptions are things that we should be talking about and that we should be demanding of our representatives. I think we should think about term limited and staggered court terms. That calls into question a good debate that we should be having as a country. I do think that there are folks that have even broader ideas about adding more Supreme Court justices or doing other things to the court. I think it's a real conversation we need to have, but I also think we need to get back to having actual jurisdictions that are in play instead of just a handful in some swing states that lead to the control of the Congress. And we're in this situation where the Supreme Court has now said political gerrymandering is just fine. And so states that have control over the legislatures basically get to draw their district however they want to. And I think the Democratic Party, and I know we'll talk a little bit about this later, has a real opportunity here to think about how we seed new and up and coming representatives in the states, run people in all districts, for school boards, for state legislatures, and try to gain control like the Republicans have done for the past 20 years, very successfully gaining control of state legislatures. We've got to pay more attention to what's happening in our backyard, while at the same time holding our presidential candidates accountable and making the Supreme Court a real issue.
I do indeed want to talk about what you're pointing out correctly is at the nub of all of this, which is that we're caught in the MAGA catch-22 of if you want to overturn these things, just win elections. Once we win elections, we're going to gerrymander the fuck out of everything so that you can't win elections. So now what do you do? And we have to break our way out of it. We now have, like it's the Simpsons joke that the Chinese use the same word for crisis and opportunity. They don't really, but Homer Simpson says, yes, crisis-tunity. We've got a crisis-tunity. Things have gotten so bad under Trump that we actually have a chance, despite all the gerrymandering, despite all the rigging that's underway, abetted by the Supreme Court, we have a chance to actually break the stranglehold on at least both the House, if not both chambers of Congress, and then to gain a trifecta back. Look, we've been here before. I was writing about this on Alternate and Raw Story back when I was writing for them back in 2020, saying, look, save democracy first, right? Bill Clinton used to say, save Social Security first, save democracy first, make that job one. And of course, we screwed that up because we tried to create this Christmas tree bill, the For the People Act, that have every last advocacy group wish list item in it. And so, of course, it became like a cotton candy spool that caught every strand of criticism imaginable, and it fell under its own weight. But the mandate is back. This is the challenge for us, is if we pull this off, it's got to be job one. I do want to talk about the Democratic Party aspect of all this. One more on voting rights. I know you are actively engaged in trying to actually take some action right now to get people engaged and overcome all of these obstacles that the Trump administration and the courts are putting in the way. What are you up to on that?
So I've been working for several years with Martin Luther King III and his wife, Andrea Waters King, with the Drum Major Institute. And they are working with the National Action Network to have a march on Washington on Friday to defend the vote. And there are over 200 organizations that have joined together in this call. And for the first time that I know of, the progressive community is coming out with these traditionally African-American organizations to do this march. So Bernie Sanders and AOC will also be speaking at the march on Friday. So we hope everybody will turn out and do that. I know that there are other things happening in other places, and we don't want to pull people out of the South where there are very real hand-to-hand combat moments happening down there where people are getting out the vote and registering voters and clearing up confusion. But if people are in the DC area on Friday between 9 and 1, come to the Lincoln Memorial and be part of this huge movement that's happening. And as part of that conversation, unity with progressives, unity between the Black and the Brown community is something that's been really important. And so the Durham Major Institute has been working with Mi Familia Vota on a Black-Brown unity coalition. And so the things that really divide us are so small compared to the things that unite us. And so bringing the Black and Brown community together, it's been a 3-year project for these organizations. And we are doing a unity event during the CBC and CHC weeks on Capitol Hill in September on the 16th. And so we're bringing together for the first time the Black and Brown community to put together a united agenda that we're presenting to Congress on that day. So there is a lot of wonderful work out there happening, and get involved. Make sure you're registered. Figure out what is happening in your states. Do not assume that because you've voted in the past that your registration is going to be okay. Double check. That's my PSA for the moment. All that said, the Black and Brown communities coming together, and then we're seeing the progressive communities joining in as well, which is something that hasn't traditionally happened. So I'm excited about that next aspect of things, which leads us into our conversation about democratic socialism, the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, and why those things aren't necessarily the same thing.
Yes, I want to talk about that. I will say that there is some pretty strong evidence. We've seen this, unfortunately, because we've had multiple opportunities to see this in recent years, that when there are overt actions, administration actions, legal rulings that cut against the right of people to vote, that try to throw sand in the gears, that try to make it more difficult, that people perceive as an obstacle, especially an obstacle that's racially motivated, which you just fucking know all of these things from the Trump administration and the Roberts Court are. There is very strong evidence that voters react. They react our immune system. There's an immune response, like in the body politic, that makes people come out to vote with more fervor. There's greater turnout. But I would just caution that it doesn't just happen on its own. People need to be aware of the threat. They need to be presented with the fact that it's a direct attack on them and their interests and their lives and their rights. And they need to be given the tools to make it easy to fight back accordingly through their vote. And that's what you and MLK III and these organizations are trying to do. They're trying to raise that awareness and get people connected with organizations that can give them the tools. So I am not a progressive. I'm not a DSA member. I love what you guys are doing. We are all on the same team. This is wonderful, and more power to you. And anyone who needs more information about any of this, please just put something in the chat. I will connect you directly to Michaeleen. And that's not an invitation to the trolls. We're saying some truly weird shit here in the chat, but we are happy to get more information about this to you. So let's talk about this. Here's the step back. I'm writing a big deep dive on this for tomorrow, like the big deep dive I did on the Supreme Court last week. I feel tugged in different directions on this. You and I, we've known each other for coming up on 25 years. We've always been in slightly different wings of the party. That has never been a distinction that particularly mattered along the way because we're on the same team. The way I felt about progressives is the way I feel about the slightly disreputable cousin in the family who's like,
watch it.
They're in a rock band. They've got their hair done a certain way. They're out to all hours. They take off and go to Holland on a moment's notice. I think they're flaky, but secretly I admire their lifestyle. And the point is, I feel like we're all in the same family here. That's the way I feel. But at the same time, this is not the same DSA that I felt a certain amount of that emotion about up till a few years ago. And I think there's been a lot of cross currents to this conversation. I think there's been, what I'm going to lay out in the article is that, in fact, I think against the backdrop of what is a real surge in success for progressives and the DSA, and as you say, those are not the same thing. There's been an even bigger surge in media commentary about it. There's a hot take industry underway. And I think it falls into four camps. I think there's DSA members themselves who are very motivated to tell a story about how successful they are and how popular their positions are. And I can understand that. I'd want to toot my own horn too, right? There's on the other end of the spectrum, the Cassandras, who are writing in increasingly incendiary terms about the threat of this new leadership that's taken over the DSA. And there's a lot to that. Then there's the warmongers. That's another camp. Those are the people mostly in the media and the Republican Party who don't really care who comes out on top. They just want the maximum amount of internecine warfare within the Democratic Party. And then finally, there are the peacemakers. They're people as diverse as Adam Gentleson of the Searchlight Institute, all the way to Amanda Littman of Run for Something, who are like, guys, can we just focus on the giant fat orange menace in front of us for the next 70 days and just pipe the fuck down? We could do this later. Let's do this later. You want to have it out? We'll have it out later. But for now, save the Republic. So that's my setup for all of this.
I have so many things to say, man.
All right, you come. I've said a lot. You come in.
You've said a lot.
Go wherever
so first
you
off,
want.
I'm a lifelong Democrat, have always been a Democrat. I've always found myself in the FDR wing of the Democratic Party. And up a decade ago, I found myself in the center of Bernie 2016 movement, which almost led to him becoming the Democratic nominee and almost led to him becoming the president of the United States. So how do we get here? And what are we really talking about? There are Democrats who consider themselves democratic socialists. That is a very different thing from the DSA. The Democratic Socialists of America are a very small organization, some under 200,000 people.
120,000 at last count.
In fact, there are mostly loose collections of them. So for instance, in New York, there's actually a pretty well-organized DSA, and they stand for something almost completely different from what their self-described national leadership is talking about. They are not a political party, just in the same way that a Tea Party is not the political party and that MAGA is not a political party. So we still have a roughly two-party system here. We have a Democratic Party that has not learned the lessons of 2016, and we have had to relearn them in 2024. And if we wait to have this conversation until 2028, we're still not going to learn the lessons from 2016. So we don't really have time to hash it out before the midterms. I do agree with that. But let's just get things down to where they need to be, because I do think the media, and you a little, Matt, are playing into the hype here.
Oh, no.
Which is actually doing damage to the Democratic Party.
Oh, okay. All right. Tell me how I've been had.
These are activist organizations that are taking a lot of air out of the room, when actually the Democratic Party and some of the progressive candidates that have been successful in some parts of the country, they've lost a few, they've won a few. But the really important thing that's happening in these progressive movements is that real people who feel like the party and the government are not touching their lives and are not doing anything for them are really wanting to get actively engaged in the democratic process. And the party's lost the thread a little bit. This is energy that we should be harnessing and that we should be welcoming and that we should be trying to work into the heart of the party itself. And I think that what a lot of the successful candidates have done have talked about social safety net issues and have talked about Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. These are not radical things. These are people who want to see the government working for them, are seeing AI centers popping up in their districts and polluting their waters and their communities. These are people that just want a fair shake at the table, which is indicative of what's happening at the Supreme Court, which is continuing to allow big money in politics and allowing the president to reach beyond where he should be able to. So when you're talking about progressive candidates, they don't work everywhere, and that's okay. And that should be okay in the party. But we need to be able to have a conversation within the family without giving people a really hard time about welcoming people into this party and ensuring that we are actually talking to the voters that we've lost in this past election. And we lost them because we weren't talking to them. We're talking in 10-point plans. We're talking above people's heads. People are working a lot of jobs to try to get things done, and it doesn't feel like the government is working for them. And that is the biggest piece that the progressives are bringing to the table and part of this conversation. So
10-point
DSA, I
plans.
think, is a red
Is that
herring. I
shots
think
fired
it's
at Elizabeth Warren?
no, of course
No,
not.
no. Look, we're all Democrats here. We all like to talk in 10-point plans. I actually liked a lot of Elizabeth Warren's 10-point plans. All right,
I
look,
love the 10-point plans. People don't think like that anymore.
no,
And
people don't think.
our young people are angry. And there are a couple things going on in our elections. First of all, it's people who are like real candidates matter, messages matter. And there's a moment here where we're defeating even those who do have a good message and who are good candidates because they're just of the older generation. So we're coming to the point where all of these pieces are coming together in the Democratic Party, and we can't form a circular firing squad like we usually do. We have to find a way to understand that there are new elements of the party that need to be nurtured and brought under the tent instead of calling them problems.
All right. Boy, there's a lot I want to cover in there too. And I agree with your point that some people are acting like essentially they're just being trolls. They're being self-serving trolls and they're being provocative. Hassan Piker is one of them. And as Cynthia Rice pointed out earlier, regular people don't know or care about this guy. And there's no reason that his tail should wag the dog of our politics just because he's attention seeking. I agree with you on that. I also think that you put your finger on what is really one of the key points of my article, which is that I think there is a problem with the new leadership of the DSA. They are a problem. They represent, talking about a cotton candy stick that kind of has all the strands catch on it, like a piece of fly paper, right? That's what they are. And as you were pointing out to me, we were texting before we got on the live stream, Republicans are going to call Democrats socialists no matter what we do. I get it.
Absolutely.
But we don't need to hand them proof points by having the head of the DSA appear on Fox News and saying that her model of the best functioning democracy is Cuba because they're so great to LGBTQ plus people. We don't need a platform of the Democratic Socialists of America that says we want to abolish the forces of the carceral state, meaning no more prisons. We don't need people like Daria Lisa Chevalier espousing that position and saying we're not going to have a separate judiciary anymore. And we're not going to have prisons. Forget the TV show Law and Order. You're not going to have either. And that's fine. That's fine with Daria Lisa. Even if these people are mentally ill or trolls or both, they're still a problem. They represent a problem for our whole team, which is why the place I land on it is I'm fine to have, what did Jesse call it? A rainbow coalition of ideologies within the party. Okay. I think that's great. I think the amalgam is stronger. And so I'm very happy to have that kind of a range within the party. But we have to cut out the cancerous lesion that has taken over at the head of the DSA, even if it's more like chapters of anarchists, right? It's like, we belong to no organized party, we're anarchists. Even if that's what it is, I don't think that the Democratic Party needs chemotherapy. I don't think we need a systemic poison to get rid of progressives. I love progressives. I want to be in partnership with progressives who are further left than I am. That's where I want to be. But we do need surgery. We do need to get rid of this faction. I do think there needs to be a clean break with them after the election. What do you make of that?
I think it's hard to do because the DSA is so diffuse, and like I said, the DSA in New York is a different organization than the one that's espousing some of these very offbeat and not mainstream positions. And I do think that you're right; these are things that the party needs to distance themselves from. However, if we spend a lot of time talking about things that aren't really part of what we're doing as a party, as a Democratic Party, we're allowing the Republicans we're eating our own as Democrats as we give more airtime to what's happening in the DSA, which has nothing to do with what's happening in the Democratic Party, in the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, or even in the Democratic Socialist wing of the Democratic Party, a Bernie Sanders or an Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. These are people who are not Democratic. So these are Democratic Socialists, but they're not DSA members. And so we have to make sure that people understand that there's a difference here. And I do think we can't get lost in the fact that the Democratic Party bears a little bit of the blame here for allowing this conversation, which should not have been a big deal, wanting everybody to have health care, wanting a system that doesn't just help special interests. These are not radical things, but painting Bernie as a radical and allowing the party to put the thumb on the scale during that election cycle doesn't help Democrats when they win elections, whether they're progressives or otherwise. It gives the fodder already to the Republicans who are going to do that anyway. So during these primary cycles where Democrat on Democrat violence, there are differences between the candidates and they should be fleshed out. But to play into some of this socialist messaging and that sort of thing, just it ends up doing the Republicans' work for them. And we need within the party to make sure that we are giving voters and real people who depend on social safety nets, who depend on things that the progressives are bringing to the forefront of the debate. We need to make sure that people understand that the Democratic Party does want to do those things too, maybe slightly differently or maybe a little more slowly, but we need to let people understand that, yes, we are trying to make things better for you and your family and not cut off our nose to spite our face.
I think this is exactly why. I'm more with Amanda Littman and Adam Gentleson, the people who from across kind of the ideological spectrum who are saying, like, guys, let's just keep it together. Let's just keep it together. And it's not just because of the pragmatic reason that we need to all row in the same direction and win in 70 days and in the lead up period to it. If you're voting by mail, fingers crossed, we have had a painful experience of people who felt like they didn't get a real chance to vote for the candidate they wanted in 2016, to vote for your former boss, to vote for Bernie. We've had the painful experience of them leaving, voting for Trump. Between 6 and 12% of Bernie Sanders' primary voters, according to an analysis in the Washington Post, the margin of victory in Wisconsin in 2016 was less than the number of Jill Stein voters. There is a real cost and a real problem here. But the other thing that you're bringing up is, I think this is exactly why this is a conversation that should be had behind closed doors and inside the family, because there are some hard truths when you're having a family conversation. If I was talking to my disreputable cousin, who I secretly admire right now, there are some hard things that you have to be able to air out loud. And you were saying to me that there are a number of Bernie Sanders supporters. I don't want to put words in your mouth about it, but tell me what's the feeling now among people who were part of Team Bernie in 2016 about what went down and about the degree to which the leadership of the Democratic Party put its thumb on the scale for Hillary?
I think there were several, we don't need to relitigate the 2016 campaign, but there were definitely moments where it was clear that the party had no interest in the support that Sanders had out there and that they were willing to put their thumb on the scale. I think what actually ended up happening is that there were ways for Bernie to have won the election, and he was not that type of a candidate. So he didn't want to go negative against Hillary. He didn't want to do the types of things that other candidates are willing to do to win. It was not about that. It was about making sure that the progressive ideology was out there amongst Democrats, where this used to be part of the mainstream Democratic platform. So I think that there's an issue here that we shouldn't lose sight of, which is that once the party came together and had a candidate, there should have been an autopsy that happened in 2016 that actually heard the voters that left the Democratic Party to vote for Trump. And there were attempts to do that, but no one could hear it because it was the same echo chamber in Washington talking to each other within the Democratic establishment saying this was a fluke. It's not a fluke 10 years later, we elected Trump again. And we're still not learning the lesson that we are not talking to working class voters. We are not talking to progressive voters. We're not talking to people who are working several jobs and otherwise should be and would be on the side of Democratic candidates. And so within the party, it's been a decade. We've still not come to terms with the fact that we're losing voters because we're not listening to them and because we're trying to do the same thing that we've done for the last 30 years. That politics is gone. We have a big youth movement that's happening here that's driving a lot of what's going on in the progressive caucus.
Right.
We have a huge anti-incumbent sentiment that's happening. We've got a lot of people organizing on the ground, which is wonderful. We've got to re-empower people in the party and let the process play out. So while that conversation could have happened behind closed doors, it didn't, and it still isn't. And in my opinion, it's going to need to happen in the 2028 cycle. And I hope that there is a process. People are sick of coronations or whoever's next in line or whoever deserves it. No, we need to let this process play out, have a real knockdown drag out as a party, and actually figure out what we stand for and not be worrying about what's happening along the fringes for an organization that is not part of the Democratic Party.
Right. So as far as that last one goes, the only friendly amendment I would have to that is I worry about it because it hurts all of us. It hurts the whole team. And so I do think there has to be a forceful break against that fringe. And the person to lead it is the most recognizable democratic socialist in the country, AOC. I respect her. I don't know her personally, so it's weird to say I like her, but I admire her intelligence and her political abilities. I do. And so I have a certain amount of faith that she sees the path forward and the need to do this. Only Nixon could go to China, and only AOC has the credibility to say, you know what, Andrea Romer, or whatever the fuck your name is, goodbye. I don't want you. I don't need you. I'll define for myself what a democratic socialist is. Thank you very much. And I do think you're right that there is a massive segment of people who generally want to affiliate with the orbit of the Democratic Party. They want to be on the side of the Democratic Party, but they think of themselves as democratic socialists more in the sense of the way that social democrats think of themselves in Europe. They have the same set of priorities. You talked about yourself as an FDR Democrat. I also agree with you that there is something that Bernie put his finger on, that the mainstream of the Democratic Party has not fully wrapped its head around yet. And I'll get to that in a moment. I will say that I think that there's a frustration for more moderate Democrats, that progressives have knowingly conflated being a fighter with being more progressive. And you even see it in the chats here. And look, I just respectfully disagree with the idea that everything about the quote unquote establishment of the Democratic Party is bad and wrong. I think there is value to what the establishment of the Democratic Party knows and does. We actually have a pretty good record. And I don't fully blame Kamala Harris for the situation that she inherited. That's not on the establishment. It sucks that we lost. It super sucks. But I think it's a conflation of different issues to say the establishment is failing and what we need to do is fight harder. We're not going to define what fight harder means. We're just going to say you need to be more progressive to be a fighter. I just don't accept that. That said, I do think that Bernie put his finger on the core frustration that Americans feel in a way that really resonated with people. You were there. You were part of it. The rallies were real. And I know I'm reaching back more than 10 years ago, but that energy was there and it's still there. And that is something to tap into and accept. So,
and he and AOC are replicating that today. Those rallies are bigger than ever. And there are people that are hungry for a vision of the United States and of the party that actually works for people and that gives people a feeling of ownership in it. And I think that's something that's gone missing from our politics, which is to say that it's become too DC centric in some ways. It's a class of political operatives, many of whom are my friends, some of whom,
Some of my best friends.
some of my best friends, and
Mine too.
myself. Bernie used to call me part of the establishment too, and that was okay. But honestly, we need to figure out how it is that we get actual people engaged and involved on the local level. And if we're going to keep them out of parties like DSA, we need to give them a place to be within the Democratic Party and to have their excitement and their diversity of opinion matter and be supported. And I think there's a definite path here for us to open up the tent and to make the Democratic Party a little more democratic as we go into the next phase of this party. But we don't have a good brand right now, and it shouldn't be that way. But I do think that as long as we continue to fight each other instead of coming back to some basic principles that we've always stood for, pro-labor, Social Security, we've taken to resting on our laurels instead of reimagining things that could be slightly better. And our 10-point plans are fine if people really are feeling the benefit of them still. And sometimes it's okay to go back in and say, look, we need something different now. This was built for 25 years ago. People need something different from the government. Government can help. Maybe we need to reimagine how government helps.
Right.
So I think that we've gotten a little too staid in the things that we think work, but actually aren't reaching down and helping people that need help right now. So I think there are huge opportunities here. The more time we spend fighting with each other, the less time we're going to actually be able to come together on an agenda that just doesn't pay lip service to people at the bottom who need help, but actually delivers on some of those promises instead of crypto.
There's a crypto. You and I agree on that.
Not to say we shouldn't fix that and that there shouldn't be some solution there, but when real people look at what the Congress is actually working on, the issues that are actually coming through are not things that most people feel, and that we should be able to deal with tens of dozens of issues. Congress isn't functioning anymore.
As always,
things that we're dealing with are things that are not necessarily impacting the day-to-day lives of people.
As always, I think the very astute people in the chat are picking up on a lot of these threads. And I just want to point out some of the things, much of which I agree with, not all completely. My friend Lefty Gramps, we've become friends through this show. We talk to each other through chats. It's a very weird relationship we have, Lefty. Points out that the leadership of the Democratic Party, I assume you're referring to, has failed us for decades. I'm not sure I'm totally with that. I don't know that President Obama failed us. And I think under President Biden, in his first 2 years, we had the most productive congressional legislating session that we've had in living memory. But I think that the issue that you're getting at in your later comments here is you say triangulation is a loser and people want real change. And there, I think we're more on the same page, because if there's one driving force in American elections for the last 5 decades, it's the party that embraces and becomes seen as the party of change wins the election. And the area where I think progressives have gotten the upper hand, probably rightly, is by identifying themselves with more rapid and harder change, which is more in line with what I think real people want. And there's what I struggle with as a more moderate Democrat is, how do you become like a passionate incrementalist? How do you become like we need to change, but in the following ways, and it's not quite as progressive, but it's still a change. I think there are some ways of marrying those thoughts up, because I do think it's ultimately about, I'm going for another, I'm trying to draw threads together. Jim Williams said it's about accountability and affordability. Yes, I think the two dominant themes in politics right now are affordability and accountability, meaning how are you holding those in power to account for their rampant corruption? And it's all wrapped in this deep, angry, frustrated desire for change. So to the extent that progressives have gotten the upper hand on that messaging, then the rest of the Democratic Party really should be learning from them. I will just say that it sticks in the craw of moderates to hear, oh, you can't be moderate and want change. You can't be moderate and be a fighter too. That I'm not totally on board with. I do have one other note that we absolutely have to hit, because this is absolutely blowing up in the chat. This is what people really want to talk about. It's not progressives, it's not the DSA, it's not Hassan Piker. It's Dolly Parton. Dolly Parton has died at the age of 80.
Oh.
And I'm really sad about this. I'm not like a Dolly Parton guy. Dolly Parton has been part of my consciousness as long as I can remember. She has been a star for as long as I've thought of stars. And you know what? It really takes me back to my Capitol Hill days, because when I was a legislative director, I shared an office with a chief of staff who was a Dolly guy. And he had Dolly songs going all the live long day. And gosh darn it, she was a genius. So
My husband was kissed on the head as a baby by Dolly Parton, and she said, "This boy is going to be a country music star." He did not turn into a country music star, but
he's a star in his own right, though.
He's a star in his own right.
He's a star.
He is the lover of Dolly Parton, and he will be very sad to hear that.
You know what his greatest accomplishment is? Marrying up, my friend.
Right.
Yes, and pass along to him. I'm in this club. I have also married up. He has made at least one smart decision that I know of in his life.
I appreciate that.
Look, great conversation. We've done this in public. I think the party can do it in private or in public or a mixture of both. I think there's got to be some perhaps raw exchanges of feelings and emotions.
And if we don't, Matt, we're going to do it during the 2028 cycle, whether we like it or not.
It's got to happen. And I think for now, let's have a detente. I am supporting Abdul El Sayed. We need him. We need the Senate seat. I'm not sure I'm on board with everything he's done and said, but he's on the team and we need him because we're talking about the fate of the republic. That's what's at stake and nothing less. I hope everyone will.
Senate in order to keep the Supreme Court from heading less in the wrong direction.
100%. As Lefty says, oops, no, hold on. No, Jim got in there with a comment supporting your current employer, the S3 group. And Lefty is saying job number one is to defeat fascists. Amen, brother. So look, on that note, I'm going to say farewell to all the chatters. Thank you for being here today. You really do make this enjoyable and lively, and you bring the energy that the progressives in the party bring too, damn it. And Michaeleen, thanks so much. It's great to see you.
Thank you. Good to see you.
All right, everyone else out there, I'm going to see you next week. Another amazing guest coming up. In the meantime, stay safe, be well, rest in peace, Dolly Parton. See you soon.